tonight.
Hamas must accept or bear the consequences.
Israel urges Hamas to say yes to a ceasefire, while the IDF prepares for a new war with Lebanon. Plus,
in every region, people continue to face religious-based violence, religious-based discrimination, both from governments and their fellow citizens.
the battle to defend religious freedom around the world. And
it's so much more than just being an ambassador for another company. It's about a higher purpose.
From Convict to Family, the company that's giving employees a second chance at life. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Concerns tonight that a war between Israel and Hezbollah is inevitable. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. From our studio in Washington, I'm Tara Mergener. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is warning Hezbollah that it won't hold back from Israel defending itself. Meanwhile, the first Democratic House incumbent has lost in a primary this year, and it may have been over his criticism of Israel. CBN senior correspondent Dale Hurd joins us now. Dale.
Tara, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in Washington for talks with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Israel stands firmly behind President Biden's ceasefire proposal, remains committed to bringing the hostages home, and that the real problem in the Middle East is Iran.
Our war is not with the people of Gaza. Our war is not with the people of Lebanon. Our war is against Hamas, against Hezbollah and their backers, the Iranian regime.
Meanwhile, Secretary Austin warned an intensified Israel-Hezbollah conflict could engulf the region.
Another war between Israel and Hezbollah could easily become a regional war with terrible consequences for the Middle East.
What many see as a political casualty of the Israel-Hamas war is New York Congressman and Squad member Jamal Bowman, who was defeated by Westchester County Executive George Latimer in New York's 16th Congressional District primary. A big issue in the race was the candidate's stances on the Israel-Hamas war.
We condemn the attacks of October 7th that killed thousands of civilians. We condemn that. But we cannot condemn that and then condone what has happened since then in Gaza. So we had to speak out. Collective punishment and targeting civilians, that is not self-defense. That goes beyond self-defense.
Most people want to see an end to the hostilities, but they don't want the end of the hostilities to come with hostages still being remaining in Hamas control, because Hamas is a terrorist organization. We've seen terrorism.
Another Democrat, Senator John Fetterman, with his trademark hoodie, was in Israel today and pledged America's support.
Well, Dale, there are always several issues in every political campaign. So how much was Bowman's stance on Israel a deciding factor in this race?
I think so. The winner, George Latimer, was urged to run by pro-Israel groups in a district with a significant Jewish population. So I would say it's a big factor, Tara.
Yeah, it sounds like it really did play a role. Dale, thank you so much. Well, here in the U.S., the DHS says more than 400 migrants came into the U.S. from Central Asia through a smuggling network affiliated with the terror group ISIS. About 150 have been arrested. Others are known to still be in 17 states. However, the whereabouts of more than 50 of them is still unknown. Most of those who crossed were allowed to stay because they were not on a terrorism watch list. Recent attacks in Russia, like this weekend's assault on churches and synagogues in the Republic of Dagestan, are raising red flags about ISIS and its offshoots. Well, surgery is for transgender children. It's one of the most heated debates of our time. And now, according to the New York Times, Biden officials succeeded in pushing an international group of medical experts to remove age limits from its guidelines for trans surgeries. The administration is reportedly concerned that age minimums would trigger political backlash. Critics say children are too young to make these decisions, while supporters argue that young people with gender dysphoria face worsening symptoms if they are not treated. The Supreme Court jumps into the heated debate over transgender rights. The justices will hear a case from the Biden administration challenging state bans on gender-affirming care. CBN's Wendy Griffith has more on that.
25 states have passed bans on gender-affirming care, and several are on hold due to litigation. The case before the High Court involves a Tennessee law that prohibits transgender minors from receiving puberty blockers, hormone therapies, and invasive surgical procedures. The Biden administration and some parents claim the law prohibits what they call life-saving treatment.
Yeah, the Department of Justice will absolutely take the position that this is life-saving care. That has been the mantra of this administration from day one of the Biden presidency.
Sarah Parshall-Perry of the Heritage Foundation says the court will be asked to decide if the laws violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
The Supreme Court is going to approach the Equal Protection Clause by making a determination of whether or not sex is the same as gender identity and vice versa. Sex has been considered a quasi-suspect class for purposes of Equal Protection Clause analysis, and that requires a heightened level of judicial scrutiny. But gender identity and transgender status have never held to be the same, especially by the Supreme Court, to be the same as biological sex.
Meanwhile, England and other European nations are backing away from transition treatments for minors after studies showed weak evidence that they lead to long-term positive impact.
This is one instance in which I think Europe is headed in the right direction. In addition to that, we are now seeing Norway, Finland, Sweden, and now the most recent addition is Scotland, who has backed off the use of chemical castration agents as well.
There's also a growing number of people who underwent gender transition that are seeking to revert back to their biological gender. They're warning distressed children and their families about rushing into life-altering medical decisions.
So at a certain point, I think the Supreme Court is going to have to reference the fact that this is a highly debatable area of public discourse. It is a political hot topic.
Ultimately, Perry believes the High Court will keep the issue with the states.
There is not going to be a willingness to pluck a constitutional right to experimental medical treatment out of thin air and certainly pull it from the ethers of the Constitution. That is going to be a question I think the judges will find better suited for the state houses.
The High Court will hear the case in the fall, and the justices will rule on the case around this time next year. Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
It appears the Supreme Court will temporarily allow emergency abortions in Idaho when a woman's health is at risk. This is one of the opinions we have been waiting for, and apparently it was mistakenly and momentarily published online today, then taken right back down. Bloomberg News reports the opinion shows a majority of the court agreed to dismiss the case involving Idaho's near total abortion ban. A court spokeswoman says it was a mistake and the opinion will be issued soon. You might remember 2 years ago, Politico obtained a draft of the Dobbs ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, and they still have not found out who leaked that one. Well, the stage is set for President Biden and former President Trump to square off on Thursday. This is the first presidential debate of the 2024 race for the White House, an event with rules not part of debates in past years. Both men hope to make their case to the American people of why they should once again occupy the Oval Office. CBN's George Thomas is in Atlanta, where the debate is happening and what voters are hoping to hear.
At this small restaurant a few blocks away from CNN's headquarters, Atlanta diners are already preparing for tomorrow's highly anticipated matchup.
There's so much at stake. There's so much at stake.
Of course it's important. It's our country, and we need to know where we stand as a country. And we definitely need to know the direction of where things are going.
The former president holds a slight lead over President Biden in this key swing state. Biden flipped Georgia blue in 2020 by a margin of just under 12,000 votes. Both campaigns have upped their ground game here in recent weeks. The debate happening here at CNN in downtown Atlanta will look and sound very different from previous debates. The primetime studio event will have no live audience, no opening statements, and the most unique rule, each candidate's microphone will be turned off unless he is directed to speak. Abortion and immigration are expected to be hot topics Thursday. Trump's appointment of 3 conservative judges led to the Supreme Court decision 2 years ago overturning Roe versus Wade. The result, abortion restrictions in nearly a dozen states.
It's going to be a key topic, I believe, because it's so recent, with things that have happened. So absolutely, I will be definitely looking at that.
The ruling, however, has felt a backlash since then, prompting the Biden campaign to release this 30-second ad ahead of tomorrow's debate, blasting Trump's record on abortion rights.
One of my #1 things, like I said, is women's rights. So that is extremely important to me, especially with the Supreme Court overturning the Roe versus Wade decisions.
Meanwhile, analysts expect the former president to hit Biden hard on his immigration policies. Since taking the White House, Democrats have struggled to stem the number of illegal immigrants entering the country. Trump leads in the 7 swing states where immigration and inflation top voter concerns.
Inflation definitely is important. I have 4 kids, so the cost of everything going up.
Also, watch for age to be a potential topic. Biden and Trump, the 2 oldest candidates to ever seek the White House, have faced questions about their physical and mental stamina. Biden is 81, Trump is 78.
Ew, that's gross. I don't want to think about that.
With the 2 contenders nearly tied in national opinion polls, each candidate's performance tomorrow night could potentially shape the future of the race between now and November. Both men will debate for a second time on September 10th. George Thomas, CBN News, Atlanta.
And CBN News will continue our on-the-ground coverage of the first presidential debate of 2024. Make sure you tune in for that. George Thomas will join us live here tomorrow on Faith Nation with all the latest from Atlanta in the final hours before both men hit that stage. And for a full wrap-up of the debate, make sure to watch Friday's 700 Club. Coming up, the global fight to protect religious freedom when Faith Nation returns. And welcome back. Oklahoma Supreme Court blocked the nation's first religious charter school. The Catholic virtual school was set to open this fall. The justices ruled the school violates both the U.S. and Oklahoma constitutions because it provides public money for a religious purpose. A lawyer for the school says they'll take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Attacks against Jews and Muslims have risen dramatically in the U.S. and all around the world. That is according to a new government report detailing the status of religious freedom in nearly 200 countries. The State Department specifically calls out Hungary for the use of anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim tropes by government leaders. Pakistan is another area of concern. There, Christians face imprisonment for blasphemy against Islam. The report also raises alarms over India, where there has been an increase in attacks against religious minorities. The report comes after the Pew Research Center found that government restrictions on religion had reached their highest global level since tracking started in 2007. With that, let's bring in Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council and former chair and vice chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Tony, what is happening that's causing this spike in persecution and anti-Semitism in nearly every corner of the globe? Is it one thing, or is it a cascade of problems, do you think?
I think it's a combination of factors, but here's one that is very clear. When America does not lead, the world follows, all right? We're not prioritizing religious freedom. And if you look at our foreign policy under this administration, religious freedom is at the bottom of the list of priorities. And so when America goes silent on the priority of religious freedom, the voices of those being persecuted are not heard, they're lost. And so what we see happening is the evidence is suggesting that because America is really sidestepping its leadership role, that this is giving a green light to terrorists and tyrants to persecute people of faith. And if you look at the document, you know, having studied many of these countries in religious persecution, this is a very politicized document. They're hard-pressed to point out the fact that anti-Semitism is not on par with Islam, the persecution of Islamic people, or Islamophobia. The same is true when you look at the religious minorities. Disproportionately, it's Christians in many of these countries that are being persecuted, but this administration is hard-pressed to acknowledge that.
And you lead me right into my next question. Pakistani Christian Nazar Masih died recently at the hands of a religiously motivated mob. On June 29th, Christians all around the world will be remembering him and others on the Day of the Christian Martyr, which is June 29th, by the way. What should the Biden administration be doing?
Well, they've got to get tough on this. They have to prioritize. But here's what's happening. All right, unlike what occurred during the Trump administration, where we saw Secretary of State Mike Pompeo prioritize religious freedom. In fact, it was the #1 foreign policy objective. That's when we saw Nigeria listed as a country of particular concern, which the Biden administration immediately took off the list. Now, when it is a country of particular concern, that means sanctions can be used against the government, because that's what we see happening in many of these countries, India, Pakistan, Nigeria. The governments themselves are not doing the persecution, but they're turning a blind eye to these mobs who are burning churches, killing Christians, murdering, raping, pillaging, and they're not doing anything about it. The United States government can use sanctions to ensure that these governments are playing fair and providing protection to all of their citizens. That's not happening under this administration.
And Tony, we've got about 30 seconds left. I want to get this question in. The Supreme Court acknowledges it accidentally posted that Idaho abortion case document that may preview a win for the Biden administration. Quickly, what do you make of that? We still don't know who leaked Dobbs.
It's hard to say, and I want to look at the whole thing before I comment and find out the background on it, and I think it's premature to comment.
Okay, I appreciate you, Tony Perkins. Thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate your thoughts.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
All right, up next, the company that's giving convicts hope and a bright future, too. Well, here's something you probably didn't know. 1 in 6 Americans has a felony record. And once they leave prison, it can be pretty tough to get a job. But one Cincinnati company is breaking down that barrier by hiring people with a criminal past. And as Charlene Aaron tells us, it's become one of the country's largest and most successful second chance companies.
70% of Nehemiah Manufacturing employees have criminal convictions. Thanks to the company's Second Chance program, however, many have the opportunity to build a better future for themselves, their families, and the community.
I am a 2-time felon who was struggling to find a job until I came across Nehemiah.
I came to Nehemiah a week after I was released from a 5.5-year prison sentence.
Since 2009, Nehemiah Manufacturing has brought jobs back to Cincinnati's inner city by licensing and marketing Procter & Gamble products such as Tide, Febreze, and Downy. CEO Dan Meyer has over 30 years' experience in the industry. He sees the company's mission as more than giving people a job, pointing to the Bible as inspiration for the company's name and mission.
It was an Old Testament prophet called by God to rebuild Jerusalem one stone, one brick at a time. And when we wanted to come in the inner city and start this company close to 15 years ago, it was to help those in most need.
At first, some of the second chance hires would work a few days or weeks and then disappear. Meyer then had an aha moment and brought in social workers to help remove barriers for employees he now sees as family.
We have transportation program, not only in the near term on a bus line, but we work with nonprofits to get our family members their first car. We have housing. We have our own Nehemiah properties where we charge quarter of the market rate and furnish it.
The company's holistic approach, which includes spiritual wellness and continuing education, has led to a thriving workforce.
As I started moving up in the company, I started to believe in myself. Fast forward 9 years, I'm the director of operations here, in charge of about 100 people here at Nehemiah that report to me.
Kristen Schumacher serves as the company's chief manufacturing officer.
We have some family members that have spent 20 plus years in prison. Yes. They would have never thought about being able to achieve a car, let alone a job, to be able to have the support that they have here. They never thought that that would even be possible. And so, Dan, like I said, Dan could speak more to the 8 pillars, but overall, what I would say, what I see with those 8 pillars is that our family members feel supported like they haven't ever before. And that translates into loyalty, that translates into wanting to work very hard for the purpose that they have here in Nehemiah.
All reasons that caught the attention of former NFL quarterback Tim Tebow and his wife, Demi Lee.
Nehemiah Manufacturing is a special place. When we had the privilege and opportunity to go for the first time, that's what really caught our eye and our heart. Meeting the people, hearing their stories, but then also seeing the way they were treated. And when we saw that, we thought this is something that we want to be a part of.
Being a part of the story of Nehemiah is so much more than just being an ambassador for another company. It's about a higher purpose, and that purpose is people.
A purpose Meyer believes is also good for business.
I always say this is capitalism done the right way. Treating people with love, dignity, and respect will build a better company. And a better bottom line.
To be here and get hired on has been a true success.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Good stuff. Well, coming up, a centenarian with a special role at the polls. Next on Faith Nation. And finally tonight, a 100-year-old Florida woman is continuing her legacy of greeting voters with a smile. Marie Esch first cast her vote for president in 1948. Since then, she has been part of the election process in a different way, volunteering as a poll worker for the last 25 years. Marie turned 100 in February, but she still drives and does crossword puzzles to stay sharp. No matter how divided the political landscape, Marie greets everyone with a friendly smile, and that's been her way for a century and counting. It just goes to show you that you are never too old to make a difference. Good for Marie. Good night. Thanks for joining us.